Black patriarch.
I convened a group of American leaders, largely African American leaders, Dorothy Height of the National Council of Negro Women, Wade Henderson, the U.S. Conference, Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, the NAACP Inc. Fund, a group of law professors from leading law schools around the country, Charles Ogletree of Harvard Law School, Japanese American law professors, many of whom had worked on the Japanese reparations campaign. And others to talk about the case for black reparations in America.
How much do you think the American people owe African Americans?
The consequence to the black community in the U.S. would run to $1.6 trillion. Another study that shows that unpaid, in today's money, unpaid wages of slaves would run to $1.4 trillion. And so there are enormous sums of money.
About applause. It's about acting now, because the talk has been done and we talk too damn much and we do too little toward our own liberation. This scholar and those with him need backing. They don't need applause. The brilliance of this man's scholarship, the brilliance, the years of sacrifice that they've put in to come up with all the documentation that is necessary, they need bodies now. Men and women, yeah, I'm gonna say it, men and women who don't mind dying for reparatory justice.
If you hear about reparations, get this very firmly fixed in your mind. You're not here for a parlor discussion. It's not something to talk about that's nice. If you don't get reparations, black folk, you're through in this country. Let me be that very specific for you. You see, what's happening to black Americans is that black Americans have been systematically, socially engineered into the lowest level of a real-life monopoly game. You do not own and control a sufficient amount of anything to be competitive in America. And you've been marginalized now for 400 years. You're getting ready to be buried. You can get buried underneath a whole broad groups of ambiguous groupings. That's everything from culture groups, language groups, and gender groups. You're going down. It's no longer an issue. You better get reparations and get it fast.
Welcome. The young man you're about to meet is out to change how we think and talk about race, and he just might do it, beginning with this cover story in the new issue of the Atlantic magazine. Its provocative title is The Case for Reparations. Yes, reparations, defined in the Merriam-Webster dictionary as the act of making amends or giving satisfaction for a wrong or injury. The wrong or injury in question is what President Lyndon Johnson once called slavery's ancient brutality and the terrible things that have followed it in the name of white supremacy enforced by state power. This article is must-reading for every American. The author is the journalist Ta-Nehisi Coates, who grew up in Baltimore, lives in Harlem, and teaches writing at MIT. He's now a senior editor of The Atlantic, where in this issue he writes, the payment of reparations would represent America's maturation out of the childhood myth of its innocence into a wisdom worthy of its founders. Thank you for joining me.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Here's exactly what you say. White supremacy does not contradict American democracy. It birthed it, nurtured it, and financed it. That is our heritage.
A lot of African Americans are starting to call for reparations for the many years of stolen labor through slavery. Is that something that you would support as president?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think it would be, first of all, its likelihood of getting through a Congress is nil. Second of all, I think it would be, very divisive. I think the real issue is when we look at the poverty rate among the African American community, when we look at the high unemployment rate within the African American community, the incarceration rate within the African American community, we have a lot of work to do. So I think what we should be talking about is making massive investments in rebuilding our cities, in creating millions of decent paying jobs, in making public colleges and universities tuition free, and working on childcare. Basically, targeting our federal resources to the areas that it is needed the most, and where it is needed the most are in impoverished communities, often African American and Latino.
I understand that, but you didn't answer the question why you weren't in favor of reparations.
Well, again, it's the same reason that the president is not, and I think
what is that reason?
Secretary Clinton is not. We have got to invest in the future. What we have got to do is address poverty in America, something that very few people talk about, and especially poverty in the African American community and the Latino community. And if you look at my record and if you look at my agenda, raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, creating millions of jobs by rebuilding our infrastructure, focusing on high rates of youth unemployment, I think our candidacy is the candidacy talking to the issues of the African American community.
Well, let me ask you, though, many African Americans, they hear that, and some will say, okay, he's talking about major economic justice, but an African American hand raises his hand and he says, well, can't get that through Congress, you can't deal with this because it's politically very difficult. A lot of your other plans are going to be politically difficult, if not impossible.
Almost 50% of South Carolina's Democrats are African Americans. It's among the highest percentage of the nation. So we're getting a lot of questions from YouTube viewers on race tonight. This first one is for Senator Edwards. Let's listen. Is anyone on the stage for reparations for slavery for African Americans? Are you?
I am. The Bible says we shall be and must be repairers of the breach. And a breach has occurred, and we have to acknowledge that. It's a breach that has resulted in inequality and opportunities for education, for health care, for housing, for employment, and so we must be mindful of that. But it's also a breach that has affected a lot of poor whites as well. We need to have a country which recognizes that there is an inequality of opportunity and a president who's ready to challenge the interest groups, be they insurance companies or mortgage companies or defense contractors who are taking the money away from the people who need it. Yes, I am for repairing the breach. Yes, I am for reparations.
Thank you. I rise to address the question, should the U.S. pay reparations for slavery? I'm going to argue in the negative on that question. I take no pleasure in doing so. Would that I would be somewhere else tonight than here before you arguing the negative of this question. I am not without sympathy for the arguments that just have been presented. I mean, how could it be otherwise? I am a descendant of slaves. I recognize that we have a past that needs to be reckoned with. But the payment of reparations to African Americans for the wrongs of that past is the wrong way to reckon with it. I say that for three reasons. It's bad social ethics. Bad social ethics. It is bad racial politics. Bad racial politics. And it averts our attention from the most profound issues with which, if we do not reckon, we're never going to put that past behind us.
According to some of the numbers that Dr. Lowry gave us a little while ago, when you do the math, when you multiply the suggested amount of reparations by the number of blacks in the United States, it works out to be about $3.5 trillion spent on reparations. Now, there's definitely a trade-off. We do not debate the fact that there is a problem in the United States today, that the legacy of slavery is clearly a deep economic divide between blacks and whites. But we need to ask what gets us closer to rectifying that problem. Would that be compensation in the form of reparations, or would that be creating new opportunity? In a few minutes, Mr. Murdoch will explain to you just how expensive, impractical, and unfair reparations are to us as individuals. But right now, I want to explain how reparations would come at the direct expense of what we need most to solve this problem.
Tonight's topic bears repeating. Should the U.S. pay reparations for slavery? And the longer you look at that simple question, the more complex it becomes. And yet the answer soon becomes completely clear. No. Should the U.S. pay? Of course, the U.S. does not exist outside of us. Real Americans would have to pay reparations. And to whom? Real Americans would have to receive those reparations payments.
Now, a new report into why Britain went to war in Iraq is vast, 4 times bigger than War and Peace. And it covers everything from reasons to go to war, weapons of mass destruction, and whether politicians misled the public. Well, here on Money Talks, we're going to be looking at the cost of war. Was it all about oil? Were costs covered up? And who made a buck out of the conflict? In a moment, we'll hear from the co-author of the $3 trillion war, Linda Bilmes. Well, joining me now is our editor-at-large, Craig Kapitas, and Linda Bilmes, who was the co-author of the $3 trillion war. Professor Bilmes, let's just start with that estimate. Your book was published in 2008. Have you changed and revised your estimates for the war?
Oh, we've estimated recently that the war will cost between $4 to $6 trillion. And of course, that doesn't include the interest on the considerable debt that we've run up to finance the war.
Right, social justice suggests that, I, as a supposedly white man, Jews became white people as soon as we became successful in America. I, as a white man, I'm responsible for paying slavery reparations, for example, in the name of social justice, even though all of my ancestors were busy getting killed by Cossacks in Russia at the time that slavery was taking place. And less than 5% of white Americans alive today have ancestors who ever held slaves. Every white person in America, though, has to pay because of group justice. How is that just? It's not. But it's group justice. It's social justice.
During my visit to Yad Vashem, I was given a gift inscribed with those words from the book of Joel. Has the like of this happened in your days or in the days of your fathers? Tell your children about it, and let your children tell theirs, and their children, the next generation. And that's why we're here. Not simply to remember, but to speak. I say this as a president, and I say it as a father. We must tell our children about a crime unique in human history, the one and only Holocaust. 6 million innocent people, men, women, children, babies, sent to their deaths as for being different, as for being Jewish. We tell them, our children, about the millions of Poles and Catholics and Roma and gay people and so many others who also must never be forgotten. Let us tell our children not only how they died, but also how they lived, as fathers and mothers and sons and daughters and brothers and sisters who loved and hoped and dreamed just like us. We must tell our children about how this evil was allowed to happen, because so many people succumbed to their darkest instincts, and because so many others stood silent.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to CJ's View. I was looking online and I happened to come across an article that stated our president, our biracial president, our half-black president, Barack Hussein Obama, earmarked $12 million to go to the Holocaust survivors. Now, I thought we were already financially strapped as a country. I thought that we were already in debt, trillions of dollars, maybe even more, who the hell knows. And, you know, this is a country that has denied reparations to African Americans, and yet we see fit to compensate people for a travesty that didn't even happen on our land.
The United States and Israel have signed a new military aid agreement, now officially the single largest pledge of military support in U.S. history. Just under $40 billion worth of war toys will be heading to Tel Aviv over the next decade, but it's still less than Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu initially demanded.
Netanyahu has been insisting that his country is in a volatile situation, and that's why Israel needed so much more military funding from the United States.
I see you bring up the point of reparations in your show often, and I see you bring it up to most of the times to people who are not prepared with enough data.
Now, you're not going to like me probably because I'm against reparations, but I say this: look, if African Americans get reparations from the government, okay, then everybody has to get them. Native Americans have to get them. Chinese Americans have to get them. I have to get a whole bunch of stuff in the crown, all right? So I'm saying we all acknowledge slavery was bad. It hurt African Americans. It continues to hurt them to this day, all right? We all acknowledge that. But by giving you or anybody else a check, you do more damage than good. It's simply not fair. We're going to give reparations to every Union soldier's family that was killed trying to free the slaves. Are we going to do that? So that's my point of view.
Ever since General William Sherman's special field order on January 16, 1865, of 40 acres and a mule to the blacks at Sea Island, Georgia, it has been a promise, well, it's been seen as a promise by the federal government that's never been fulfilled. Many, including those closest to President Obama, will push him to make this happen. And they're going to say, by the way, it wouldn't be the first time America has paid out a lot of money in reparations for the wrongs that they did to other people. What's your position?
My position is, sure, slavery was a horrible thing that happened, but this is not going to help race relations in the United States today. It's not going to help the dialogue. And now it would be different if residents today were affected themselves because of something that happened back in the 1800s. But unfortunately, now all it's going to do is cause more tension amongst the races.
What do you think, Dave?
I think the tone should be, you know, if we keep focusing on the past, we probably won't reach our destiny. We need to focus on the future. I think we have to make sure that these kind of injustices don't happen again. That's where the focus should be.
make kind of a provocative comment in your new book here, Mugged, and I think it's on page 151. You write that various groups, feminists, gay rights groups, and those who are defending immigrants have commandeered the black civil rights experience.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that because I think it's one of the most important points of the book. I mean, I think the way liberals have treated blacks like children and many of their policies have been harmful to blacks. At least they got the beneficiary group right. We do have to, I mean, we shouldn't. There is the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow laws. We don't owe the homeless. We don't owe feminists. We don't owe women who are desirous of having abortions, but that's, or gays who want to get married to one another. That's what civil rights has become for much of the left. They dropped the blacks after 5 minutes.
Immigrant rights are not civil rights?
No, I think civil rights are for blacks. We owe black people something. We have a legacy of slavery. Immigrants haven't even been in this country.
It wouldn't be the first time America has paid out a lot of money in reparations for the wrongs that they did to other people. It wouldn't be the first time America has paid out a lot of money in reparations for the wrongs that they did to other people.
I'm back here with Bill O'Reilly, host of the O'Reilly Factor on Fox, to talk about his brand new book in stores today, Killing Lincoln, the shocking assassination that changed America forever. And Bill, I have to say, this book surprised me. It's a lot different from your other books. It's a terrific read.
Thank you.
And you're really going back to your roots as a history teacher.
I am. I taught history for a couple of years in kind of a rough neighborhood in Miami, Florida. And, you know, I was always fascinated by Abraham Lincoln. I think by far and away he's the gold standard.
Why now, though? Why Lincoln now?
Well, we're a divided country now, just as we were when Lincoln took office. Not nearly as intense as back then, but we're divided. And we need tremendous leadership to get us back on course right now. And so I said, you know, who's the guy, if I were running for president, that I'd want to emulate? And it would be Abraham Lincoln.
Well, it's not only a night to celebrate the country's first Republican president, but a night to celebrate local Republicans as well. Last night, Republicans hosted their Kern County Lincoln Day dinner. The night's keynote speaker was Congressman Darrell Issa, chairman of the House Oversight and Reform Committee. The Lincoln Day dinner is also the Kern County Republican Party's annual fundraiser, with money raised going to the Get Out the Vote efforts and voter registration.
With the end of the Civil War in 1865 and the ratification of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, slavery was abolished and African Americans were given the right to vote. Despite the progress, newly freed blacks faced an array of daunting social obstacles. To deal with these issues, the Union began an era known as Reconstruction. Senator Charles Sumner of Massachusetts and Representative Thaddeus Stevens were among a group of congressional members known as Radical Republicans, who dedicated themselves to crafting Reconstruction legislation aimed at protecting and educating freedmen until they were able to provide for themselves. Established in 1865, the Freedmen's Bureau was headed up by Civil War hero, Union Army General Oliver Howard. In his role as commissioner of the Bureau, Howard promoted the welfare and education of former slaves.
He played an integral part in establishing schools for African Americans. Howard University is one of those schools that come out of the Freedmen's Bureau, established in 1867, as well as schools here in Washington, D.C. that were established on the land of what we know today as Berry Farms, a farm that was owned by James Berry.
Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation had freed slaves across the South. But Washington still had no clear plan for what to do once African Americans were free. On January 11th, President Lincoln sent his Secretary of War, Edwin M. Stanton, to Savannah. Stanton instructed General Sherman to set up a meeting with some of the city's black ministers.
The way we can best take care of ourselves is to have land, and we can soon maintain ourselves and have something to spare. We want to be placed on land until we're able to buy it and make it our own.
4 days later, anxious to get thousands of freed slaves off his hands and Washington off his back, General Sherman issued Special Field Order 15. It was only a temporary order, but it became one of the most controversial of the Civil War. Plantations in the rice country had been abandoned by white planters during the war. 400,000 of these acres would be given over to African Americans for settlement. The huge land tract included the Sea Islands and parts of the Georgia and South Carolina coast.
40 acres of land will be given out to each family. Plus, Sherman says, the Army's got tons of mules, which we don't really need. They're broken down from our long march. If anyone wants a mule, they can have one of these mules. This is the origin of that famous phrase, 40 acres and a mule.
Here was a real revolution. A revolution in the land, on the land, a chance to be their own freeholders.
For 4 million African Americans in the South, news of 40 acres and a mule spread as fast as the contagion of freedom itself. Many saw this as proof that emancipation would finally give black men and women a true stake in the land they had toiled on for centuries.
Providing compensation to slave owners was not a new idea in 1862. In fact, as early as 1833, Great Britain abolished slavery and compensated slave owners for their freed slaves. The idea was tested in the nation's capital with the help of a dedicated abolitionist, Massachusetts Senator Henry Wilson. Eventually, Wilson takes his passion to end slavery to Capitol Hill, where as a senator from Massachusetts, he introduces the District of Columbia Emancipation Act in December of 1861.
Ultimately, slave owners got about an average of $300 per enslaved person. There were over 900 claimants,
Abraham Lincoln signed Wilson's act into law on April 16, 1862.
Reconstruction was a great opportunity to really build a new society in the South from the ashes of slavery and to, for the first time, really bring African Americans fully into the realm of American freedom. You might say that the amazing thing is that it was tried at all, just 2 or 3 years after the ending of slavery. It didn't succeed, it was overthrown, a new system of white supremacy was enforced in the South. It left to the next century, really, to work out this question of whether there is going to be a racial boundary around the concept of freedom in American life.
In 1883, the Supreme Court made a fateful decision. they voted to nullify the Civil Rights Act of 1875. That meant that from now on, there could once again be whites-only hotels, restaurants, barbershops, and theaters. Black leader Henry McNeil Turner knew he had been betrayed by the nation's highest court.
It was a hard task to get an enactment through Congress that contemplated anything like civil rights. Now, a Republican Supreme Court has declared the whole thing null and void, leaving the Negro in a condition compared with which the serfs of Russia are lords. I have not deserted the Republican Party. The Republican Party has deserted me and 7 million of my race.
Now, what's going to drive us into this underclass structure? First of all, are the legacies of slavery and Jim Crowism. We are still bearing the burdens and the scars. They were never corrected. That's one of the failings of our leadership in this country. They had the nerve, the audacity to let black folks suffer for 460 years. And at the end of the civil rights movement, rather than going back and saying, let's find out what has happened to black folk for 460 years, have they been psychologically, emotionally, politically, educationally damaged? Nobody spent 1 minute of time trying to figure out what had happened to black folk over all that period of time. So in the course of the civil rights movement, at the end of it, they say, well, let's pretend that nothing has happened to them, that they were not injured, they were not hurt, and now let's go seek integration and pretend that we're all equal. Now that was grossly unfair, because by that point in time, and by the 1966 period, whites had become economic giants in America. They owned and controlled everything at that point in time. Black folk didn't own anything. Whites controlled almost 100% of all the wealth, the income, the privileges, the businesses, the resources, and all levels of government. Blacks had nothing. Blacks were one-foot midgets. And they allowed us then to use integration to walk from our communities, from our ghettos, over in their communities, totally disarmed, not understanding anything, blind, naked, and then saying that you can go and compete. Compete with what?
We made a lot of progress, but we're not gonna let you turn back the clock.
This is the kind of stuff that causes trouble. You're digging in a wound that's trying to heal.
They are the enemy, man. They are the enemy.
We know how to sucker punch you, because we just begun to fight.
Somehow down racial lines, we're still divided. The question has to be why.
Well, Georgetown sociology professor Michael Eric Dyson has a solution to white privilege. He says white Americans ought to create individual reparations accounts to compensate black Americans for centuries of oppression. Professor Dyson joins us now to explain how that would work and why.
So I talked about buying kids computers, being able to take kids to school, to tutor them, to be able to do individual things that are tailored to their desires and aspirations, such as becoming professionals, exposing them to things they wouldn't ordinarily see. So in other words, it's a kind of ethic of compassion joined to a sense of conscience that motivates them to do what they're motivated to do.
Reparations. The issue first surfaced nationally right after the Civil War, with advocates believing compensation in the form of a mule apiece plus 40 acres of land would help erase the stain slavery left on America. Since that time, arguments for and against reparations have abounded. Are reparations valid? Is it too late? What form should reparations take? And is it just for African Americans?
How should this be paid? I think in terms of reparations as constituting a portfolio of options, so that there would be a total sum, but the total sum could be distributed partially in terms of checks to individual African Americans that might be distributed over a period of years, not necessarily one point in time.
In fact, you talked about using the model that the Germans used in compensating Holocaust victims, which turned out to be payments of $100 a month.
Two individuals.
Two individuals.
And also there were payments made to an institution, to the State of Israel, to assist it in its development and survival. So you could have some forms of institution building that might take place as a part of the overall reparations package. So I'm fairly open-minded about how this might be done, as long as it has the constructive aim of closing the disparities that exist in this society.
In the book, however, I have suggested that programs be put together that would be funded from federal revenues paid into by all of us, that would fund education from birth to through college for blacks based on need, and massive programs of economic empowerment of the black community, infusions of capital to close this enormous gap between blacks and whites in America, opened during slavery.
$1.5 billion was given out to black people over the last couple of years for wrongs the government did to black farmers. Unfortunately, like, I have cousins who got money. They never farmed before. They got 50 grand, the taxes were paid. And a lot of people, most people, let's be honest, blew the money. And a lot of people, most people, let's be honest, blew the money. And a lot of people, most people, let's be honest, blew the money. I think it's a huge mistake. And to your point, I think it's going to set us backwards.
Speaking of benefits, one of the numbers out there about the profits made by slaves is $9.12 billion, using an annual interest rate of 5%. But when we talk about calculating the amount of reparations, some calculations are as high as $4 trillion, and some say that's an underestimate. How would you calculate this, and to whom or how would the monies be dispersed or distributed?
Okay. So let me first of all say that with respect to who would be eligible to receive reparations, I have come to the view, after long conversations with my wife, actually, I've come to the view that there should be two criteria. The first is that the individual should have to establish that he or she had an ancestor who was enslaved in the United States. And then the second criteria would be that the individual would have to indicate that for at least 10 years before the onset of the reparations program, that in some official document that he or she indicated that they were racially either black, colored, Negro, or African American. Okay? So that's who would be eligible. In terms of the magnitude, the baseline from my perspective is the present value of the 40 acres and the implements, or the mule. The present value of the 40 acres that was to be distributed to the 4 million ex-slaves at the time of emancipation. And then we can think about how that number should be increased to adjust for the social penalties associated with Jim Crow and ongoing discrimination. But that would be the baseline. And yes, the numbers could get quite huge. They could be in the vicinity of $3 to $6 trillion.
See, we have systems to help our poor. Our poorest people in the United States are some of the richest people in the world, because 50% of the world lives on $1 a day. 50% of the world makes $365 a year. So our poorest person gets Section 8. I have an actual client okay, or tenant, if I can use that word, that stays in one of my properties, okay, the rent on that property is $1,300 a month. She only has to give me $110. That's it. And she has a 3-bedroom house. So we have systems to help the poor. Section 8, food stamps, all types of subsidies. Their kids get to go to college basically for free because tax dollars pay for those people.
And all of you that want to go in business, don't waste your time. You cannot start a business and operate without a town or community. Why can't you do it? Because without a community, you have no market. If you don't have a market, every black gonna go by your store at 200 miles an hour heading for the suburbs and heading for the malls. And that's why you got this major displacement of capital out of the black neighborhood. And I tell black folk, if you want to go in business today, don't do it. Give me the money. I need it. Because you're going to go bankrupt. 80% of all black folk that go into business under the present system, you will go bankrupt within 2 years. You will lose your money within 2 years because you don't have a market.
In America, in the Asian community, the dollar circulates among the community's banks and retailers and professionals for about 28 days before it leaves the community. In Jewish communities, that circulation period is about 19 days. In WASP communities, predominantly white areas, if you will, the dollar stays 17 days. My Hispanic brothers and sisters keep their dollar for about a week. And in the black community, the community Dr. King was slain fighting for, we keep our dollar for 6 hours. Let me tell you what that means in real-life terms. That means in Asian communities, Asian kids get to see business owners who look like them every day, all the time. There are Asian banks and insurance companies and grocery stores all over the community, and those businesses employ from the community, and the families take care of those businesses, and vice versa. Asian unemployment in America is at a low 4 to 5%. Most Asian Americans, over 50%, are self-employed or employed by Asian firms. Those circumstances, that economic and business growth, lead to high educational attainment. There's business and political power, low poverty, strong businesses, low crime in Asian neighborhoods. 6 hours in the black community, let me tell you what that means. That means that black kids can't see business owners who look like them every day. There are no black-owned grocery stores and dry cleaners and pharmacies and clothing stores locally owned in the black community. So the people there cannot get jobs, much less create jobs in the community. So black unemployment in places like Detroit and Gary and Oakland, sometimes 40%. And those circumstances lead to social problems like recidivism, high crime, high gang and drug activity, poverty. That's what's going on with those 6 hours. And those disparities cause the same kind of problems in the corporate space. 60% of the money that is spent with Asian suppliers in corporate America, so your Asian professional firms, Asian products you see on the shelves, used to be spent with black-owned businesses. And the same kind of shift has happened between Hispanic businesses and black-owned businesses. That's why when you go into a grocery store, you'll see whole aisles full of products coming from Asian companies, from Hispanic companies. So let's go to the grocery store or the drugstore and see where the black-oriented products are. You go there, you'll see products like these. You'll see Spotin' Wave and Let's Jam and Smooth and Shine and Dark and Lovely and Strength of Nature and Dark and Natural and Stay Soft Fro. All those products that only black people buy every day. 100% black market. All those products are owned by L'Oreal, a company out of France. All those billions of dollars leave the black community. Some of that money could come back if L'Oreal had supplier diversity, if L'Oreal was doing any business with black-owned firms. L'Oreal only has black buyers, no black suppliers. Same deal with Hennessy. Hennessy, Wall Street Journal estimates between 60 to 80% of Hennessy's US market comes from the black community. That means that Hennessy closes down tomorrow without black consumers billions and billions of dollars going outside of the community. Hennessy has no black distributors, no black suppliers, does not advertise in black-owned media or use black-owned advertising agencies. So, bottom line, most of the businesses in black areas are not black-owned. Most of the products catering to black culture don't come from black companies. Black unemployment is highest among any group in America. Black firms are the highest employer of black people. So, I can give you more. Chicago, 60 KFC franchises, most of them full of black people and black money every day. None of them owned by black franchisees. Well, I conceived of and conducted the empowerment experiment, hoping that if we shared this story with you, you would do just that. And it was tough living like that. It was tough and fearful, being called a racist, a Nazi, or the other N-word, dealing with death threats and hate mail, just because I decided for 1 year to do this experiment to explore the possibility of using my buying power to help my economically deprived community. It was humiliating taking CBS News and PBS NewsHour through the black areas of Chicago, trudging through all of that economic deprivation and all that social decay. Every face we see black, watching the correspondents and camera crews shake their heads as we go store to store, door to door. Hi, we're doing a story on black businesses. May we meet your owner? Blocks and blocks, sometimes miles, dozens of businesses without engaging a black proprietor. It hurt as a black woman to see that. And I know I hurt some feelings to show that. But I really hoped that that year would bring you in and take you there and show you things that you may not want to see, but you needed to see and hopefully really wanted to understand. I wanted you to see Jordan. I met this pretty little girl during that year. I would not have met Jordan or gone anywhere near where Jordan lives, Bronzeville on the south side of Chicago, had it not been for that year. Bronzeville is a dilapidated area, lots of crime, drugs, depression. Still, our young Jordan wanted to build a children's clothing store in Bronzeville, and she did, with her mom and her grandmom and her grandfather's life savings. They called it Jordan's Closets, and it was the most beautiful children's store I've ever seen. They had, on Saturdays, they would invite little girls from the community for tea parties and book clubs. And on Sundays, her mom would host, for teenagers in the community, modeling classes and a charm school. What a gem for Bronzeville. What a great place for me to spend my money. What a wonderful role model for the kids there. Jordan's Closets is closed. Another abandoned dream. Another destroyed dream in an abandoned space. And so it is in Bronzeville. Destroyed dream after destroyed dream. Abandoned space after abandoned space. These are the businesses that I supported during the empowerment experiment. All of them are gone. I took on this year. I did this year because the lack of economic and business power in the black community is the single most salient, destructive, and self-perpetuated problem the black community faces, and still the most ignored. Our buying power, our businesses have always empowered and improved our community, but now, in an integrated society, somehow we're supposed to live without all of that. Somehow we're supposed to survive without the businesses and the buying power. In the early 1900s, shortly after emancipation, believe it or not, black businesses, the black community had amassed great business power. We had black Wall Streets, we had hospital systems, transportation systems, hotel chains, grocery stores, all kinds of businesses and professionals thrived. Hundreds of millions of dollars were created and circulated in the black community. Unemployment was statistically insignificant. The unemployment gap between whites and blacks in this country only widened in 1960 at integration. After slavery, more and more black towns became self-sustaining until integration or until they were burned down by racists. Vibrant neighborhoods were bombed, set on fire, then looted. These people had their homes and thriving economic thoroughfares burned to the ground because they endeavored to be self-sustaining. Over 90% of the lynchings of black men that happened during Jim Crow and Reconstruction were of business owners. What an awful paradox. We had, when we were politically disenfranchised, we had economic power. We took that economic power for granted because we needed to fight for our civil rights. Now we're politically free, but economically insignificant. That's a tough trade-off to make. Martin Luther King thought about that trade-off. Martin Luther King wasn't just fighting for basic human rights. He fought for black businesses too. In a public address that he gave the day before he died, he said this: "We got to strengthen black institutions. I want you to take your money out of the banks downtown and put your money into Tri-State Bank. We need to have a bank in. You have 6 or 7 insurance companies in Memphis. Put your insurance there. We need to have an insurance in." Dr. King died asking us to support these businesses, and we didn't, and they're gone. Those banks and insurance companies were the backbone of the black community, and they're gone now. Now I'm asking you, how does that make you feel? Black or not, as Americans, how does that make you feel? Do you wonder, like I do, what would have happened had those businesses thrived? Do you wonder what Detroit would look like now if we had those banks and insurance companies? So I ask you, what are we going to do about that? Dr. King wondered, what would you do? And he didn't know, just like I don't know. He said this: "Many white Americans of goodwill have never connected bigotry with economic exploitation. They have deplored prejudice, but tolerated or ignored economic injustice." Dr. King said that. Now, this is what they say about our Black Year. They say that we illuminated the roadblocks faced by black businesses in this racially divided economy, that this book will appeal to students of economics and sociology and anyone looking for inspiration to affect positive change in their community. How's this for inspiration? I did an hour-long interview on C-SPAN, and I took that time to mention this paper company called South Coast Paper that I support when I go to Office Max. I told everyone about the 60 people that have jobs that would not be there otherwise in Birmingham and South Carolina had it not been for this black-owned paper company, and had it not been for Office Max taking a chance on this black-owned paper company. C-SPAN tells me it is one of their most popular segments. They ran it against the Republican National Convention, me against Congressman Ryan, and people watch me. But the good news about that story, well, the better news about that story, is that Office Max and South Coast Paper reported that their 800 number and their website were flooded by consumers looking for that paper. Twice a week, I leave my pristine suburb and I go to the west side of Chicago to go to Forest Cleaners. Forest Cleaners is one of the few black-owned businesses owned by, one of the few black-owned businesses in this all-black part of town. James Forrest is the owner. My kids call him Uncle James. James has been there for about 3 years, and he just made his first hire, an orphaned teenage boy who has spent a lot of time in juvenile detention and foster homes. But this is a great kid, and Uncle James knows that. So he has taken him in, become a father figure to him, and is showing him the business. The west side of Chicago needs that Cleaners. Those boys need Uncle James, and I am helping Uncle James help those boys by supporting him during those 15 minutes a week. I gave a lecture in Boston. A woman named Debbie came, she bought my book, read it, wrote me, we're friends now. Debbie asked for a website designer. I told her about a great business in Philadelphia. This kid is a tech genius, and he's a great role model for the kids in that community. She used his business. She loves her site. She told all of her friends about this great black-owned business that they need to support. And they did support him. And he got a new corporate client because of Debbie. Did I mention that my friend Debbie is white? You see, you don't have to be an activist to do what I do. You don't have to live in a struggling community to empower it. We're all connected to this economy, so we can all do something about economic injustice. Your dollar can do just as much as mine, as Debbie's, to make our economy more fair and more inclusive. Mima, my mother, was just a Cuban farm girl, never graduated from high school, never learned how to drive, but she was one of the most brilliant and the bravest woman I'll ever know. In 2008, right before we launched the Empowerment Experiment, my mother was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and given 3 months to live. I was going to shut this whole thing down to be with Louisa. And Mima said, no, you have to do this. This will be the most important thing that you'll ever do. She is the reason that I'm on this stage today. And I wonder, now that Mima is gone, Mima lived 16 months with pancreatic cancer, one of the worst cancers there is, and she died in my arms, having witnessed her daughter complete the most important thing that she'll ever do. Mima died 1 month after the empowerment experiment. And that's wonderful that she got to see her daughter do that. But I still wonder, 5 years later, did I waste the last year of my mother's life fighting for something that's never going to change, never be penetrated? And not because the right man has his foot on our necks, but because no matter how much media attention we earn, no matter how much studies we generate, my people just won't come together again. And the larger community won't, because it's taboo, unite to create an integrated economy. The larger community won't fight for economic empowerment the way we did for civil and human rights. But then Mima will send me folks like Debbie, like Jordan, like Uncle James, and all those great people who went out to buy South Coast paper. And she shows me that it was indeed worth it. That it was indeed worth it. That's the point. All of these strangers came together to create an empowered community. Strangers connected by their sense of community. That's my Black year. It's not the story of an extreme thing that I did for 1 year. It's the story of the little things we all can do every day. Thank you. Thank you so much.
It is also important that as they come up with the list of requirements for reparations, that they don't be too quick to look for a financial payout. Instead, they should look for unlimited access to certain services and total control over certain industries. When you talk about reparations, because the cost of the trauma was so extensive and unending, the payment that is to be received, your compensation, should also be excessive and unending. You see, what if Black people never had to pay a property tax as a result of having their property taken? That's perpetual, forever. What if our children automatically had free access to the universities in the state? Forever. That's perpetual. What if we were given exclusive right to certain industries within the state? What if we were given exclusive control over certain lands within that city? That's perpetual. Be careful about money. Money runs out. And because we don't have a self-sustaining economic community, if they were to give the Black descendants of the victims of the Wilmington race riots a financial payout, white people know through economic science that that $1 trillion will be back in their hands in 25 years. Why? Because you have no businesses of your own in which to spend it. So we have to be very strategic with our war for reparations, because if we're not careful, white people will give you the money in one hand and take it all back in the next, because you don't have independent institutions in which to sustain yourself.
So as soon as a Black person gets paid, before it touches another Black hand, he runs right to the suburbs and spends it. He spends 95% of his money immediately outside his own community. He keeps 5% to take back into his community. Out of 5% he takes back into his community, he spends 3% of that in non-Black owned hands in his own communities. Look around your neighborhood, goes into non-Black owned businesses. Only 2% again, only 2% of all the Black people in America keep their own money in their own communities.
Welcome to Virginia EBT. Today, you're going to learn how to use your Virginia EBT card. The Virginia EBT card is a safe and easy way to get and use your food stamp benefits. EBT stands for Electronic Benefits Transfer. The Virginia EBT card is like a bank debit card that lets you access your food stamp account at grocery stores. Once your benefits are deposited into your account, you can begin using them with your Virginia EBT card. You use the same card every month. You do not need to get a new one. When you receive your card, you also receive a question and answer brochure that provides very important information about your card. Please be sure to read it and keep it at home in case you have questions about how the card works. In this training video, you will learn how to select a PIN, use your card at the grocery store, check your account balance, protect your card and PIN, and call the customer service number located on the back of the EBT card for assistance. The Virginia EBT card is a safe and easy way to get and use your food stamp benefits. It's safe. You can't use your card without a personal identification number called a PIN. And it's easy. You can use it anywhere you see the Quest logo, and every time you use your card, you get a receipt showing the amount of benefits left in your account. Let me show you how it works. PIN means personal identification number. You must have a 4-digit PIN to use your Virginia EBT card and access your food stamp benefits. When you receive your Virginia EBT card, you must call the Client Customer Service Help Desk to choose a PIN. You will need your Virginia EBT card number, Social Security number, and birth date. If you do not have a Social Security number, you will need your food stamp case number. You can use your card at the grocery store to spend your food stamp benefits. Look for the Quest logo in the store windows or on the doors. Before you begin your shopping, make sure that the store accepts the Virginia EBT card. Also, make sure you know your EBT balance. If you don't see the Quest logo, go to the courtesy desk. Store personnel can tell you if they accept the card. You can use your food stamp benefits to purchase eligible food items, including fruits, vegetables, and plants or seeds to grow food for your household. Items such as pet food, cleaning products, paper products, alcoholic beverages, or tobacco cannot be purchased with food stamp benefits. Manufacturers' cents-off coupons may be used with your food stamp purchase, but please remember that while food stamp purchases are not taxed, sales tax is charged on the value of the coupons. For a complete guide of items you may or may not purchase with food stamp benefits, contact your local social services office. At the checkout lane, let the cashier know that you're using your Virginia EBT card. You or the cashier swipes your card through the point of sale POS machine. The cashier enters the amount of purchase. Make sure this amount is correct. Only you must enter your 4-digit PIN. Never give your PIN to the cashier to enter. Make sure you enter your PIN carefully so that no one else sees it. Your PIN is a secret 4-digit number that makes your card work. You cannot use your card without your PIN. If you forget your PIN and try to guess at the number, your card will be frozen after the 5th incorrect try. You will have to wait until after midnight to use your card again. Or you can reset your PIN immediately by calling the Client Customer Service Help Desk and selecting a new PIN. Once your PIN has been changed, you can shop that day without waiting until after midnight. After you enter your PIN, the POS machine checks to make sure you have enough benefits in your account to pay for your groceries. If you have enough benefits in your account, your purchase is approved. If you do not have enough benefits in your account, your purchase is not approved. If you need to spend more than the benefits left in your account, you can pay the rest by cash, check, debit, or credit card. Just let the cashier know if you want to pay part of the purchase using another method of payment. If you know before you begin checking out that you will be using another payment method in addition to EBT, let the cashier know right away. Finally, the POS machine prints a receipt. The receipt shows your beginning balance, how much you spent, and how much is left in your account. Save the receipt so the next time you go shopping, you'll know how much is in your account. And don't forget to take your card. That's all there is to it. Just remember, when the cashier gives you your receipt, look to see if the purchase amount is correct. Always keep the receipt. The receipt tells you how much you spent and the amount of benefits you have left in your account. It doesn't happen often, but sometimes the POS machines aren't working, or sometimes the merchant may not have a POS machine at all, like a farmer's market or route vendor. In these situations, you may still be able to use your Virginia EBT card. To process this type of transaction, the cashier uses a paper voucher and calls to get telephone approval for your purchase. Once the cashier gets approval for your purchase, the amount of the purchase is deducted from your account. Instead of giving you a receipt for your purchase, the cashier fills out a paper voucher that shows the amount of purchase. The cashier won't need your PIN, so don't tell it. You must sign the voucher and make sure the right amount is being charged to your account. Just like other purchases, get a copy for your records. Now that we've covered how you can use your Virginia EBT card, here's how you can find out your account balance. There are 4 ways to check your balance. Check your last receipt. Go to www.ebt.acs-inc.com. You can set up a user ID and password to check your account balance. You can call the Client Customer Service Help Desk. Customer service is available to give you any information about your account. Perform a balance inquiry transaction on a POS machine. Without your card, you can't get your benefits, so it's important for you to take care of your EBT card.
The Virginia EBT card is important to me. Without it, I can't get my benefits, so it's important for me to take care of it. When I'm not using it, I put it in a safe place.
To protect your card, keep it clean, like you would a credit card. Keep the black or magnetic stripe on the back free from scratches. Do not bend or twist your card or use it to scrape windshields or open door locks. And keep your card away from electronic equipment like televisions and microwaves, speakers, magnets, and direct sunlight. Always keep your card and PIN safe. If you give someone else your card and PIN, or if you write your PIN on your card and someone gets your benefits will not be replaced. If your card is lost or stolen, call the Client Customer Service Help Desk immediately to prevent anyone from using your benefits. Once you call customer service and report your card lost or stolen, customer service deactivates your card and issues a request for a new card to be sent to you.
Even if somebody finds or steals my card, they can't use it without knowing my PIN. My PIN is my secret code, so I keep it secret. I don't tell my PIN to anyone, and I don't write my PIN on my card or anywhere else where someone could see it. I never carry it with me where someone could find it. That keeps my benefits safe.
If you lose your card or think that somebody knows your PIN, call customer service immediately to report it. Customer service disables your card, so no more benefits can be taken from your account. A new card will be sent to you. You may also change your PIN or keep the one you already have. If you simply forget your PIN but haven't lost your card, you can select a new PIN by calling customer service. You can call the Client Customer Service Help Desk if you have any problems using your Virginia EBT card. Customer service is available to assist you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can call customer service if you have any problems using your card, or if you lose your card, or if you have questions about your account. The customer service number is located on the back of your card and on the training materials you received with your card. You can call customer service from any telephone. When you call customer service, you will need to enter the card number shown on the front of your Virginia EBT card. If you lost your card and don't have the card number, just stay on the line and a customer service representative will answer the call. After entering your card number using a touch-tone telephone, you will hear a list of available options. Then you simply enter the number of the option you want. If you do not have a touch-tone phone, you can speak your option to the Automated Response Unit, or ARU. Once you hear the entire list of options, a customer service representative answers the call. Customer service is available to help you with your card questions. Here are some of the reasons to call customer service. You just received your first Virginia EBT card and need to select a PIN. You forgot or want to change your PIN. Someone is using your card without your approval. Your card is lost, stolen, or damaged, and you need a new one. You need your account balance. You have questions regarding your card or your account. Whatever your need, the Client Customer Service Help Desk is available to help you with your card 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So it's that easy. The Virginia EBT card is a safe and easy way to get and use your food stamp benefits. You can use your card at any participating grocery stores that display the Quest logo. And if you have any problems with your card, you can always call customer service. The Virginia EBT card. It's safe and easy.
Lawmakers will vote on a new state budget next week. Governor Brown and top Democrats struck a deal that boosts the state's rainy day fund by $2 billion. It also sets aside $400 million for affordable housing and boosts funding for child care and preschool programs by $500 million. It also includes a big change to the state's welfare system.
KPX5's political analyst Melissa Kane joins us now to explain. You're right there. I was looking right at you. No introduction necessary,
Obviously,
really, right?
You know, everyone knows who I am. Thank you so much. Look, this new change that's sort of tacked onto this budget deal has to do with parents and their children. Right now, parents who get cash assistance through CalWorks don't get any more money if they have more kids. But now it looks like that is all going to change.
It's the biggest welfare change in California in more than 20 years.
We're talking about families that are living in deep poverty. By definition, 50% or less of the federal poverty line. So we're talking about families that are living on $10,000 a year for a family of 3.
What this means is that parents will get $136 a month in cash for each child. That's in addition to other public help like food stamps and subsidized health and child care. The extra cash benefits will cost the state $200 million in the first year alone. It's a lot of money, but it's still less than 1% of the total state budget.
We found a child poverty sub-account where we could use those resources to really pay for this.
That's money that supporters say is well spent.
Why would we deny a mother and her child $136 a month because when the child was born, that mother was receiving public assistance?
Still, not everyone thinks it's a great idea.
I don't know, part of me says, you know, if you're receiving public assistance, you might want to use birth control until you can get some of your own money coming in.
Critics say this may encourage people on public assistance to have kids they can't afford.
I'm not in favor of that at all.
And why not?
If they can't take care of the ones they got, they shouldn't be having more kids.
I remember the underlying law was passed in 1994. As you might recall, the mid-90s was a big time for welfare reform. Lots of laws were passed. Some have been repealed, some haven't. At the time, back in 94, 23 Democrats voted in favor of these benefit caps. We will see whether or not this state legislature and the Democrats will vote for the repeal. The deadline to vote and pass the state budget is this next Wednesday. So we'll be watching that.
And this is an issue that sort of keeps evolving as times change, as the state changes as well.
And as we get more and more data, I mean, one of the arguments in favor of the repeal is they say it doesn't actually have the intended effect. That there was at least one study cited in 2014 when this issue came up, and it said, look, it didn't actually have any impact on the fertility rates of people receiving benefits. So we're learning, I think, a lot as we go.
And $136 doesn't go very far. I mean,
certainly not in San Francisco.
Not in California.
All right. Thank you, Melissa.
You know, all of us hate to pay any more money for anything, right? Do you know right now that we're paying a kosher tax? Have you ever heard of it? We're paying a kosher tax. Do a search on the internet, kosher tax scam. Well, here's what it is. If you go to, here's one website, the Kosher Nostra scam on the American Consumer. What happens is most items and foods that you buy in the supermarket today has a minuscule tax that is paid on that. You don't know anything about it though, do you? That's right, because it's probably the best kept secret in the world. All the products that you buy, if you ever notice, if it has a U on it, some of them have P's on them, some of them have K's on them, some of them, you know, but if you see it, all these things, but I'm just showing you some of the things you buy right now. Do you know that you're paying a tax on those items and it supports Israel? Did you know that? It's probably they've made billions upon billions of dollars. Now, it started out with food, primarily dealing with food items. But as you can see, these Jewish folks, okay, the rabbis who are in charge of this, they figured they can make a lot more money if they put it on everything else. And so now they have it on Reynolds Wrap, they have it on Cascade, you know, a lot of things that aren't food. So they have a good deal here. So what I would like to know from the Jewish community out there, if this was a tax going to the Catholic Church, instead of a kosher tax, it was called the Catholic tax, would the Jewish people be complaining about it? I would think so.
Because you see, what's going to happen now, you're going to have a new growth industry in this country. The new growth industry is going to be owning, operating, and building prisons and selling services and goods to them. And there are two major corporations right now, I won't give you the names, have already set up a big contract to take over some of the monies of it. The government passed what's called the Omnibus Crime Bill for $29 billion to build more prisons in the United States. And two big companies have found out they can get $82,000 for every jail cell they build and $27,000 a year to operate the prison per prisoner. And just in all those black prisoners you find, just the black male prisoners, for supplying them with shaving lotion, underarm deodorant, and soap, that is a $3 billion a year industry, and black people don't get a penny out of it. People are already making money off of our people in prison. And nobody even cares about where the money is going and how they're making the extra money, even after they criminalize you.
I've come to the view that there should be two criteria. The first is that the individual should have to establish that he or she had an ancestor who was enslaved in the United States. And then the second criteria would be that the individual would have to indicate that for at least 10 years before the onset of the reparations program, that in some official document that he or she indicated that they were racially either black, colored, Negro, or African American. Okay? So that's who would be eligible.
You guys are Americans. You are the descendants of American slaves. America had no other child but the slaves to build this great nation. This is a powerful country. I'm not going back to Africa. I was born in Watts, California, the hood, the real hood. I was part of the Watts riot. So why would I want to go back to Africa, and I was born here in the United States? Through slavery, our culture was created. It created the American slave culture.
Nobody has ever addressed the real issues. The civil rights movement didn't address the issues. They started talking about social integration. Social integration was not the problem with black folk, and even the concept of civil rights. They twisted and corrupted that concept, and they corrupted the whole concept of civil rights and made it a civil issue for everybody. Nobody's ever enslaved the gays, the midgets, the humpbacks, women, Asians, Arabs, Hispanic, and American Indians. They enslaved black folk. That's why it's critically important, to go back to one of your earlier questions, for people to understand, when you start talking about issues, about rights, the Dred Scott decision said the black man has no rights. It didn't say the Asian man, the Arab man, the Mexican man, the Indian man. It says the black man. So what's happening now is that the whole concept of civil rights and social integration, all this has been mal-distributed, and it's been corrupted into what we call fabricated classes. They're getting all the benefits that black folks should be getting today.
Portugal began the African slave trade in Europe about 50 years before Columbus arrived in the Americas. The Portuguese called their slaves Negroes, the Portuguese word for black. Then came the civil rights movement, and those words, Negro and colored, would no longer do. In the mid-1960s, white America was hearing for the first time the proud declaration, "Black is beautiful." And with the right to vote finally secured, it was time for black power. Negro and colored were rewritten to simply black. After 20 years of black, Jesse Jackson and some leading scholars decided in the late 1980s that it was time for the final name change to African American. At a news conference, Jesse Jackson called to announce a campaign with the goal of establishing the term African American as the proper descriptive term. He said, just as we're called colored, but we're not that, and then Negro, but we're not that, to be called black is just as baseless. Black tells you about skin color and what side of town you live on. African American evokes discussion of the world. Jesse Jackson went on to say that day, every ethnic group in this country has a reference to some land base, some historical cultural base.
So our first panelist is Dr. Yaba Blay, who is a Ghanaian-born American. We also have next on our panel Rosa Clemente, who is an Afro-Boricua hip-hop activist, journalist, and a 2008 Green Party vice presidential candidate. Our next panelist is Rogelio Pineda, who is a Caribbean researcher and writer who is actually from the island of Quisqueya. And we also have Crystal Rahman, who is the writer, director, and producer of Memoirs of a Black Latina. So we could give a round of applause. The first question that I want to start with is, should the term African American be used exclusively to identify people of African descent whose ancestors were enslaved within the continental United States, or should it be inclusive of people of African descent, one in the Americas, throughout the Americas, and also people who are living in the United States?
Well, Western Kentucky's Student University Government Association just passed a resolution calling on their school to provide free tuition for all African American students. Why is that? Well, they say it's to make reparations for slavery, a practice abolished more than 150 years ago. The resolution also, by the way, denounces standardized tests for, quote, upholding white supremacy, and calls on the school to admit any currently incarcerated black person who wants to attend. They do not exclude violent criminals from that category. Andrea Ambaum is a student senator at Western Kentucky University. She co-authored the resolution in question, and she joins us now. Andrea, thanks for coming on. The question is, would this apply to students whose families weren't here when slavery existed in the United States? There are a lot of recent immigrants from Africa, the Caribbean. Would they benefit from this?
So when we talk about reparations, we're definitely specifically talking about people who have direct ties to slavery, Jim Crow, and segregation. I think that there are separate but just as important conversations to have about African immigrants, Caribbean immigrants who come here and also face racial discrimination that inhibits them from education as well.
Huh. So even people whose families didn't suffer under state-sponsored discrimination or under slavery would be entitled to that. Those groups tend to do, as I'm sure you know from looking at the numbers, pretty well. In a lot of cases, out-earn native-born Americans. Why would they be entitled to this also, or to any special consideration?
So you're using the word entitled, and I don't know if that's the right word. When we talk about African immigrants who come here and face racial discrimination, I can actually speak on this very uniquely because I am the daughter of immigrants who came here. There is unique discrimination that faces African immigrants that many people don't talk about.
You got to get reparations. Now, how are you going to get it? Let me run through 3 or 4 things very quickly because I don't want to take up the time here. First thing you must do, I've heard it mentioned already, we got to commit a national campaign all over this country to start publicizing the issue of reparations for black folk. Not as something nice, but as a necessity, period. That means every living soul, every organization, every corps, every institution in this country must begin to start promoting reparations for black folk all over this country. That's level 1, is a massive, massive promotion of reparations for black folk. Second level, level 2, what we must do at second level 2 now is to start having facts-finding hearings. You must have facts-finding hearings all over this country. And you're going to have facts-finding hearings on at least 2 different levels. One is you're going to go after facts-finding about what roles governments have played in the reparations, in the slavery trade against black folk, and enslaving of black folk, the marginalization of black folk. And that should break down into 2 levels. One is to investigate all levels of domestic governments, that's city, county, federal, and state governments. And the second group would go after the international. So you should have 2 groups of black folk in this country exploring and fact-finding on what roles government have played, one domestically and one internationally. On the left-hand side, you should be doing the same thing for the domestic side. You should be going after the private sector. You should be going after all the private corporations in the United States, what roles they played and how they benefited directly from slavery. And also, on the same side, you must go after all the international corporations and the roles they played and how they benefited. Now, the Harvest Institute right now, my think tank, we've already picked up one. We put out a press release on that. We're going after the domestic role that major corporations played in the United States. We've already identified approximately 240 companies that are still in existence that profiteer directly and enrich themselves off of black folk. We're going after that. And what we have to do in our fact finding is be able to factuate, document the direct line between how blacks have been crippled all the way up to economically, politically, socially, and educationally, and tied into these major corporations or tied into levels of government. That's your level 2. Level 3, you must then start having a national convention in this country. And right now, I think Dorothy Tillman in Chicago has already, we talked about this. She's going to try to call one in Chicago this coming year. We must have everybody who's playing a role, like Congressman Conyers and everybody from the Congress, and Cobra, everybody should be at a national convention where we all come in there to not only energize each other, but to share information, see where we are. They're trying to set it up for this coming February, someplace in the United States, possibly Chicago. That's your 3rd level. The 4th level you should start doing is trying to get into, out of this conference should come strategies and plans and a specific role model. You got to have a role model, a model that every black can tie into. Now, most people are going to try to follow the Jewish reparations model or the Japanese model. I'm following the Indian model. The Indians are the most appropriate model if you want to track down, do anything to get reparations of black folk. Why? Because you see, only American Indians and black folk were spelled out in the Constitution. The Indians on reservations and black folk, there's a direct lineage between those 2 groups. And if you really want to track and get reparations, the easiest and quickest way is to go find out what happened to American Indians, what benefits they got, and track it. In my new book called Power Numbers, it takes you through every one of those steps. You can follow it. If you pick that up, you can come right to reparations very quickly, because it'll be very difficult for the government to deny black folk for the same thing they're giving the Indians. So when you hear people talking about how bad off Indians are, first thing you say, fine, if Indians that bad off, put us as black folk in the same status with the Indians. We'll take that. Because see, right, what Indians got, see, first of all, nobody declared Indians to be a nation. Indians declared themselves to be a nation. They declared themselves to be a nation all the way up until about 1832 when Supreme Court Justice Marshall said, okay, I'll recognize you as a nation. We never declared ourselves to be a nation. We've always tried to do just the opposite of what the Indians did. Once they became a nation, they drew up a constitution for themselves. We never had a constitution. And what the Indians did with that constitution is then to go to the United States government and say, we do not want to integrate. We did just the opposite. We integrated. And I can track everything right down, or we can follow the Indian model if you want to. And you can see, and all that's already built into the law, and there's a direct lineage between American Indians and black folk that you can follow very easily and get to reparations. But we need to have a model. And in my new book, I get that model to be on the stand in about another month. You get the Powernomics model that'll take you through all those steps of what they did throughout history, from the Blair Amendments and everything else. You can track them very easily, and it'd be very difficult for the United States government to deny you reparations when you only 2 people that have a constitutional relationship with this government is black folk and Indians. Just like Indians use what they call natural rights and lay their claim against the land, we should use natural law and lay a claim against our labor, misappropriated labor. The next level what you must do is move to a legal step. You need to form at the 4th level, get you a legal body right now, whether it's going to be pro bono or paid. And out of our convention, we should be able to raise some funds to set up a mass legal body that be ready to start serving suits based on those facts that you're going to find at the second level. And when you start to find those, then we should have people going after suits. One side suing the different levels of government, other side suing the private sector to get reparation funds for black folk. Then at the last level, you need to set up, at the sixth level, you need to set up some kind of a pool, or resource, or retrieval agency that every time we get some benefits, we're going to a special fund that will be held for pooling and aggregating. Now, then out of that special agency, we break away into two groups, what I would recommend. One, you would have an economic development bank on the East Coast and an economic development bank on the West Coast. And what those banks would do is take most of the money you get and not give it to black folk as individuals. You put it into a massive bank where black folk can go draw that money to start low interest, get low interest loans or free monies to build businesses and industries throughout the United States. You also, if you track the Indians, you should try to get yourself some tax-free or tax-exempt land. Just like Indians can go grab any piece of land and federalize and put up a casino, you tell them you ought to do the same thing as a black person, get tax-exempt statuses. We can go on and on, but there's a lot of things we can track. Go after the Indians.
Black patriarch